The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when the human delegation walked through the massive doors. Ambassador Chen Wei led her team of 12 humans down the central aisle, their footsteps echoing in the vast space that held representatives from over 300 species. The council had existed for 50,000 years, and in all that time, they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. High Counselor Vexthan, a being of pure crystalline energy, observed the humans with what could only be described as cautious interest. The humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 7 years ago, yet here they were, requesting full membership in the Galactic Council. Most species waited centuries before making such a request. The humans had barely waited a decade. "You understand," Vexthan said, his voice resonating through the chamber like wind chimes, "that membership requires more than technological achievement. We must understand your species, your history, your nature." Ambassador Chen nodded. She was a small woman by human standards, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived things that would break most beings. "We understand completely, High Counselor. That is why we brought these." She gestured to her team, and they began unpacking containers they had carried with them. The council members watched with confusion as the humans laid out objects on the floor before them. There was a worn leather boot, a child's drawing, a rusted knife, a handful of seeds in a small bag, a tattered book, and dozens of other seemingly random items. "What is this?" asked Representative Krillax, an insectoid being known for his impatience. "You bring garbage to the council." "No," Chen said calmly. "We bring everything that made us survivors." She picked up the worn leather boot. This boot walked across a frozen wasteland 200 years ago. Its owner was part of an expedition to the coldest place on our planet. They were trying to be the first to reach the southern pole. Many died. The cold killed them. Starvation killed them, but some survived. They kept walking because that is what humans do. We do not stop. He set down the boot and picked up the child's drawing. It showed stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. This was drawn by a child in a city called Hiroshima. In our year 1945, a weapon was dropped on that city, a weapon that split atoms and burned everything. 80,000 people died in seconds, but this child survived. She drew this picture in a hospital while doctors did not know if she would live or die. She lived for 60 more years. She had children and grandchildren. She never stopped hopping. The council chamber had grown very quiet. Even Krillax had nothing to say. Chen picked up the rusted knife. This knife was used by a man who was lost in a jungle for 71 days. He had no food, no tools, nothing but this knife and his will to live. He ate insects. He drank rainwater. He fought off predators with his bare hands when the knife was not enough. When rescuers found him, he had lost half his body weight, but he was alive, and he was still walking in the direction he believed would lead him home. One by one, she went through the objects. Seeds carried across oceans by refugees who had lost everything else. Books preserved through wars and burnings because humans believed knowledge was worth dying for. Tools made from scraps by prisoners who refused to let captivity break their spirits. "We come from a death world," Chen said finally. "Our planet tried to kill us every day of our existence. The ground shook and swallowed our cities. The sky burned us with radiation from our own sun. The water rose and drowned our coastlines. The air itself turned poisonous in some places. Diseases evolved alongside us, always hunting, always killing. And we killed each other too, because resources were scarce and fear was easy." She paused and looked around at the assembled species. Many of them came from paradise worlds, planets with stable climates and abundant resources. They had evolved into intelligence gradually, peacefully. They had never known true struggle. "But we survived," Chen continued. "Not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We survived because we refused to die. We survived because when one of us fell, another picked up what they were carrying and kept moving. We survived because we told stories around fires in the dark, stories that reminded us that dawn would come. We survived because we loved each other fiercely, even when loving meant losing." She gestured at the objects spread across the floor. "These are not garbage, Representative Krillax. These are our survival. Our ancestors carried these things through fire and flood and war and plague. They carried them when carrying anything was a burden they could not afford. They carried them because these objects held meaning, and meaning is what kept them alive when everything else said they should die." High Counselor Vex then leaned forward, his crystalline form pulsing with interest. "You speak of hardship as if it were a gift." "It was," Chen said simply. "Every struggle taught us something. Every loss made us treasure what remained. Every defeat taught us how to get up again. When we reached the stars, we did not come as a peaceful species that had never known conflict. We came as survivors. We brought our stubbornness, our creativity, our refusal to accept the impossible. We brought our love and our hate and our hope and our fear. We brought everything that made us human." She picked up the handful of seeds in their small bag. These seeds traveled with refugees across an ocean 500 years ago. The refugees had nothing. Their homes were destroyed. Their families were scattered. But they carried seeds because they believed they would find new ground to plant them in. They believed in a future they could not see. She held up the bag. "This is what we bring to the Galactic Council, not just our technology or our resources. We bring our faith in tomorrow. We bring our stubborn, foolish, unbreakable belief that no matter how dark things get, dawn will come if we just keep moving forward." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, High Counselor Vexthan rose from his seat. "We have seen many species join this council," he said. "Some were advanced beyond measure. Some were ancient beyond comprehension. But I do not think we have ever seen a species quite like yours." Ambassador Chen smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of someone who had carried heavy things for a long time. "We are just survivors, High Counselor. That is all we have ever been." What the council did not know then, what they would learn in the years to come, was that humanity's survival instinct was not just a story from their past. It was a living force that would change the galaxy forever. The first real test came 3 years later. The Void Swarm arrived without warning, pouring through a tier in space that opened at the edge of Council territory. They were not a species in any way the Council understood. They were more like a force of nature, a wave of destruction that consumed everything in its path. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply ate. In 20,000 years, the Council had never faced a threat they could not reason with. They had no protocols for pure annihilation. As world after world fell silent, the Council descended into chaos. "We cannot fight them," Vexthan said at the emergency assembly. "Our weapons do nothing. Our shields fail. We have lost 400 worlds in 6 months. At this rate, the Council will cease to exist within a decade." The chamber erupted in panic. Species that had known only peace for millennia found themselves facing extinction. Some called for surrender. Others called for flight, abandoning their territories and fleeing to the far edges of the galaxy. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process a reality where death was coming and nothing could stop it. Then Ambassador Chen stood up. "We will fight," she said. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was not the respectful silence of curiosity. It was the uncomfortable silence of beings watching something embarrassing. "Your species is the youngest here," Krillax said, not unkindly. "You have been spacefaring for barely a decade. What can you possibly offer against a threat that has defeated the combined might of 300 civilizations?" Chen did not flinch. "Everything that made us survivors." She turned to face the assembly. "I have spent 3 years learning about your species, all of you, and I have noticed something. You evolved on paradise worlds. Your ancestors never faced predators. Your climates were stable. Your resources were abundant. You became intelligent because you had time to think, time to build, time to grow." She paused. "But you never learned to fight, not really. Not the way we did. You developed weapons as curiosities, as tools for hunting or sport. You never needed them for survival. You never learned what it feels like to know that if you do not win, you and everyone you love will die. Vexthan's crystalline form flickered. And you believe this makes you capable of defeating the swarm. I believe it makes us willing to try, Chen said. On our world we have a saying, it is not the size of the dog in the fight but the size of the fight in the dog. We are a small species, young, weak compared to many of you, but we have been fighting for our lives since the first human stood upright on the plains of Africa. We have never stopped. She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's history. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, famines. The council watched in horror as millions of years of struggle played out before them. This is what made us, Chen said. Every one of these catastrophes should have ended us, but they did not, because when the earthquake came, we dug ourselves out. When the plague came, we learned medicine. When the wars came, we built better walls and sharper swords. When the sky itself burned, we refused to look away. We adapted. We overcame. We survived. She turned off the display. The swarm is just another disaster, another earthquake, another plague, another war. We have faced worse odds and won. Let us show you how. There was a long silence. Then Representative Krillax, who had never shown the humans anything but skepticism, slowly raised one of his many limbs. "What do you need?" he asked. Chen smiled that tired smile again. "Resources, ships, and trust. Give us those three things and we will give you something in return." "What?" "Hope." Over the next 6 months, humanity mobilized in a way the galaxy had never seen. They stripped their colonies of resources and converted their ships into weapons platforms. They recruited volunteers from every world that had lost people to the swarm, training them in human tactics of guerrilla warfare and psychological operations. They built bunkers and fallback positions and secret caches of supplies, planning not for one battle, but for a war that could last generations. And they did something else, something that confused the council at first. They told stories. Human historians traveled to every threatened world, recording the histories of species facing extinction. Human artists created monuments and memorials for fallen civilizations. Human musicians composed songs that would carry the memories of the dead into the future. "Why waste time on this?" Vexthan asked Chen during one of their strategy meetings. "Every moment you spend on art is a moment you could spend building weapons." Chen shook her head. "This is not a waste. This is why we fight. We fight so that these stories will not be forgotten. We fight so that the songs will keep being sung. If we lose everything but forget why we were fighting, we have not really survived at all." Vexthan did not understand then. He would learn. The Battle of Kethri Prime was the first human victory against the swarm, and it changed everything. Kethri Prime was a small world, barely worth noticing by galactic standards. Its inhabitants were the Kethri, a peaceful species of gentle giants who had never raised a weapon in their entire evolutionary history. When the swarm came for them, the council wrote them off as lost. But Commander Sarah Okonkwo had other ideas. Okonkwo was a Nigerian woman whose great-grandmother had survived the Biafran War, and whose grandmother had survived the Lagos floods, and whose mother had survived the resource conflicts of the 2050s. She came from a long line of survivors, and she had no intention of letting that line end in space. She arrived at Kethri Prime with 300 human soldiers and a plan that every council military advisor had called insane. The swarm outnumbered them 1,000,000 to 1. Their technology was beyond anything the council had ever encountered. Conventional wisdom said the only rational response was retreat. Okonkwo did not believe in retreat. "The swarm has never faced an enemy that fights back," she told her troops as they made planetfall. "They have consumed species that surrendered, species that fled, species that tried to negotiate. But they have never faced humans. They have never faced people who would rather die fighting than live running." The Kethri watched in confusion as the humans dug trenches and set traps and camouflaged their positions. These were tactics from ancient Earth wars, designed for enemies that could be surprised and demoralized. The council advisors insisted they would not work against a mindless swarm. They were wrong. When the swarm descended on Kethri Prime, they expected easy prey. They found something else entirely. They found humans who had studied their behavior and identified patterns they did not know they had. They found explosives buried in places the swarm liked to gather. They found kill zones where human soldiers waited with weapons modified to exploit weaknesses no one else had bothered to look for. And they found something that no species had ever shown them before: defiance. The battle lasted 17 days. The humans lost 200 soldiers. The swarm lost millions. When it was over, the remaining swarm units retreated for the first time in recorded history. Okonkwo stood in the ruins of the Kethri capital, covered in blood and ash, and sent a message to the Galactic Council. "They can be beaten," she said. "They can be hurt, they can be afraid, and they can die. Send us more soldiers, send us more resources, and we will teach the galaxy how to survive." The message spread across Council space like wildfire. For 6 months, the galaxy had known only despair. Now, suddenly, there was something else. A small flame of hope, lit by a species that had only just arrived among the stars. More volunteers came, not just from humanity, but from other species who had watched their worlds fall and felt helpless. They came to learn human tactics, to understand how a young species could do what ancient civilizations could not. And the humans taught them. They taught them how to dig trenches and set ambushes. They taught them how to read enemy movements and exploit weaknesses. They taught them how to keep fighting even when hope seemed lost. But most importantly, they taught them how to care. "Why do you fight so hard?" a young Kethri soldier asked Okonkwo one day. "Your home world is far from here. The swarm has not touched your people yet. You could run. You could hide. Why do you stay and die with us?" Okonkwo looked at the young soldier for a long moment. Then she pulled out a small object from her pocket. It was a worn leather wallet, cracked and faded with age. "This belonged to my great-great-grandfather," she said. "He was a farmer in a place called Nigeria. When war came, he had nothing, no weapons, no training, no reason to believe he would survive. But his neighbors needed help, so he helped them. He hid them in his barn and shared his food and kept watch through the night. Many of them survived because of him." She put the wallet away. "He did not do it because he thought he would win. He did it because it was right. Because when disaster comes, you do not ask whether the people suffering deserve your help. You just help. That is what being human means. That is what we brought to the stars." The young Kethri did not fully understand, but he felt something he had never felt before. He felt like maybe, just maybe, the darkness could be pushed back. Word of the human philosophy spread. Other species began to adopt it, not just the tactics but the mindset. They began to see themselves not as isolated civilizations waiting to be consumed, but as a community of survivors fighting for each other. And slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. The war lasted 40 years. 40 years of battles and losses and desperate last stands. 40 years of humans and their allies clawing back territory centimeter by centimeter. 40 years of songs sung for the dead and stories told around campfires on worlds far from Earth. Ambassador Chen died in the 15th year, killed when a swarm attack destroyed the diplomatic station she was working from. She was 73 years old and had spent the last decade of her life building the alliance that would eventually win the war. At her memorial, High Counselor Vexthan spoke to a crowd of millions. Species that had never agreed on anything stood together in mourning for a human woman who had taught them what survival really meant. "She told me once," Vexthan said, "that humans measure their lives not in years but in purpose. She said a human could live 100 years and die empty or live 30 years and die full. I asked her what she meant, and she showed me the objects she had brought to the council chamber all those years ago. The boot, the drawing, the knife, the seeds. He paused, his crystalline form flickering with emotion that his species rarely showed. She said those objects were full. They were full of the lives of people who had carried them, full of the hopes and dreams and struggles that had given them meaning. She said that was what humans brought to the stars, not just their technology or their stubborn will to survive, but their ability to fill things with meaning. To look at a worn leather boot and see not just leather, but the journey it had taken. To look at a child's drawing and see not just paper, but hope. He looked out at the assembled crowd. We have fought for 15 years. We have lost billions of people from hundreds of species, but we are still here. We are still fighting. And we are still full of the memories of those we have lost, full of the hope that Chen gave us, full of the stubborn, foolish human belief that dawn will come if we just keep moving forward. The crowd was silent. Then slowly a sound began to rise. It was not a cheer or a cry of mourning. It was singing. A human song taught by human soldiers to their alien comrades. The words were in a language most of them did not speak, but they knew what it meant. It was a song about survival, about getting up when you have been knocked down, about fighting for tomorrow even when today is full of pain. And across the galaxy, in bunkers and hospitals and refugee camps and battlefields, other voices joined in. Humans and Kethri and crystalline energy beings and insectoid warriors, all singing the same song. All fighting the same fight, all surviving together. 25 years later, the war ended. Commander Okonkwo, now a general and the most decorated soldier in galactic history, led the final assault on the swarm's home dimension. She was 92 years old and had been fighting since she was 47. She had buried friends and raised orphans and watched entire species die. But she had never stopped. When the dimensional gate was sealed and the swarm was cut off from council space forever, she stood in the ruins of their staging ground and wept. Not from joy, though there was joy. Not from relief, though there was relief. She wept because it was over and she did not know how to be anything but a soldier. A young human officer found her there, sitting in the ash with tears streaming down her face. "General, are you all right?" Okonkwo looked up at him. He was barely 25, born after the war had already been raging for 15 years. He had never known a galaxy at peace. "Do you know what I was before the war?" she asked him. "No, ma'am." "I was a teacher. I taught history to children in Lagos. I told them stories about our past, about all the times humanity had faced destruction and found a way through. I never thought I would be part of one of those stories myself." She stood up slowly, her old bones aching. "That is what we brought to the stars, you know, not just our weapons and our tactics. We brought our stories. We brought our belief that stories matter, that remembering matters, that the things we carry with us are what define us." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn leather wallet that had belonged to her ancestor. "I have carried this through 40 years of war," she said. "It is old and damaged and probably worthless by any practical measure, but it is full of my family, full of everyone who carried it before me, full of everyone I have fought beside and mourned and loved." She looked at the young officer. "When you go home, what will you carry?" He thought about it. "I do not know yet." Okonkwo smiled. It was a tired smile, the same smile that Ambassador Chen had worn all those years ago. The smile of someone who had carried heavy things for a long time and found they could carry them a little while longer. "You will figure it out," she said. "We always do. That is what it means to be human. We survive. We carry things. We fill them with meaning. And when the time comes, we pass them on to someone else who will carry them further than we could." She put the wallet away and straightened her uniform. "Come on," she said. "Let us go home. We have earned a rest and there are stories to tell." 100 years after the Void War ended, a young human historian named James Okonkwo stood in the Galactic Museum of History, looking at a display case that held objects from another era. There was a worn leather boot, a child's drawing, a rusted knife, a handful of seeds in a small bag. And beside them, newer items, a worn leather wallet, a broken helmet, a tattered flag that had flown over the final battlefield. He was the great-grandson of General Sarah Okonkwo and the great-great-grandson of Ambassador Chen Wei, though those two lines had not merged until 50 years after the war ended. His family tree was a history of the galaxy itself, human and alien branches intertwined like roots of an ancient tree. "Impressive, is it not?" said a voice beside him. James turned to see a crystalline being studying the display. Even after a century of alliance, humans and the Vexti did not interact often. Their physiologies were too different, their cultures too alien. But the war had created bonds that transcended such differences. "I was just thinking about what these objects meant to the people who carried them," James said. "My ancestor, Ambassador Chen, she said that humans measure things not by their worth but by their meaning. I have read that quote 100 times, but standing here looking at these things, I think I understand it now." The Vexti shifted, his crystalline form catching the light. "I was present when she first said those words. I was young then, barely a century old. I did not understand." James looked at him with new interest. "You knew her?" "I served on the council in the early years. I watched your species arrive as strangers and become family. I saw you teach us things we had forgotten, or perhaps never knew. Things about survival and meaning and carrying on when all hope seems lost." He gestured at the display. "We Vexti live for thousands of years. We thought that made us wise, but your species, with your brief lives and your fragile bodies, you understood something we did not. You understood that it is not how long you survive that matters. It is what you carry with you, what you leave behind." James nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the war. She said that humans did not win because we were strong. We won because we cared. We cared about people we had never met, species we had only just discovered, futures we would never see. We fought not for ourselves but for each other." "That is the true gift your species brought to the stars," the Vexti said. "Not your technology or your tactics, your compassion, your stubborn, foolish belief that every life matters, that every story deserves to be told, that every object can be filled with meaning if someone cares enough to fill it." James looked back at the display case. Behind the glass, the worn leather boot seemed almost alive, as if it remembered all the miles it had walked. The child's drawing glowed with the hope of a survivor. The rusted knife gleamed with the determination of a man who refused to die. "Do you know what I carry?" James asked. "Tell me." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a data chip, worn and scratched from years of handling. "This contains the last recording my grandmother made before she died. She was 120 years old, the last survivor of the original human delegation to the council. In the recording, she talks about what it means to be human, what it means to survive." He looked at the chip. "She says that survival is not about living. It is about passing things on. Every story we tell, every object we carry, every moment of meaning we create, those are the things that survive after we are gone. Our bodies die, but our stories live forever." The Vexti was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother was wise." "She learned from the best," James smiled. "She used to say that Ambassador Chen taught her everything she knew about survival, and Ambassador Chen learned from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother, all the way back to the first humans who walked across the plains of Africa. A chain of survivors, passing down the knowledge of how to carry on." He looked around the museum. It was full of species from across the galaxy, all of them studying the artifacts of the war that had almost destroyed them. A century ago, most of these species had never heard of humans. Now, human culture was woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. Human music played in concert halls on 1,000 worlds. Human art hung in museums beside the masterpieces of ancient civilizations. Human words had entered the vocabulary of species that did not have mouths, and everywhere, in every culture, the lessons of human survival had taken root. Dig in, hold on, carry what matters, pass it on. The council is meeting tomorrow, the Vextai said. There is a new threat on the horizon, not another swarm but something else, a challenge that will test us all. James nodded. I heard the dimensional fractures, they are getting worse. Yes, some say we should seal ourselves off, protect what we have. Others say we should explore, find new ways to adapt. The debate has been going on for months. And what do you say? The Vextai's crystalline form flickered. I say we should ask the humans. James laughed. We do not have all the answers, you know. We are still young by galactic standards, still learning. Yes, but you are also still carrying, still filling things with meaning, still believing that tomorrow will come if you just keep moving forward. The Vextai turned to face him directly. That is what we need now, not answers, hope. James thought about his grandmother, fighting through a war that lasted longer than most human lives. He thought about Ambassador Chen, standing before the council with a handful of worn objects and a dream of unity. He thought about all the humans who had carried all the things across all the distances, filling them with meaning, passing them on to the next generation. We will do what we have always done, he said. We will adapt. We will carry what matters. We will survive. And when we find new species out there in the fractures, new civilizations that have never known anything but struggle, we will teach them what we know. He looked at the display case one last time, the worn leather boot, the child's drawing, the rusted knife, the seeds. We will teach them to carry things, he said, to fill them with meaning, to pass them on, because that is what humanity brought to the stars, not just our bodies or our technology or our stubborn will to live. We brought the knowledge that survival is a chain, not a moment, a story, not an ending, a journey that never really stops because there is always something worth carrying forward. The Vextai nodded slowly, then let us begin. Together, they walked out of the museum and into a galaxy that was still full of challenges, still full of dangers, still full of moments that would test them to their limits. But it was also full of survivors, full of stories, full of meaning. And that, in the end, was what humanity had brought to the stars. Not the hope that they would never face hardship, but the knowledge that hardship could be survived, that darkness would always give way to dawn, that no matter what the universe threw at them, there would always be someone willing to dig in, hold on, and carry on. The journey continued, the stories grew, and across the galaxy, in every language and on every world, the lesson of human survival echoed into eternity. When the darkness comes, do not give up. Dig your trenches, set your fires, tell your stories, carry your things. And wait for dawn. It always comes.